To this day, I am not quite sure if I exactly saw something or not, but I certainly cannot explain the phenomena. Last year, I was with my brothers on our way to Las Vegas for a 1-week vacation where we planned on binge drinking, some gambling, and debauchery. We were driving there, and if anybody has ever driven through Nevada or any of the southwestern United States, you would know that it is a vast wasteland of desert and nothingness. It's important for me to mention this first, because mistaking something being there and not being there, it's pretty hard to do when your backdrop is a stale, plain desert. Because I was in the back driver's seat, I couldn't tell you what highway we were on, or what even road we were going down, and quite frankly, I don't really care, because that doesn't matter in the story. I believe at this point, though, we were probably a couple of hours outside of Vegas, and we were on a long stretch of road, as is much of the state. To my left was kind of a rocky outcropping. Not quite a big mountain or cliff, but just a lot of rocky-like hills. I might be terrible at describing the landscape, but if you need a visual, just simply Google Maps a random highway in Nevada so you kind of understand what I'm talking about. The landscape really doesn't change much. Anyway, I'm looking out, and I see what looks to be a large black shape sitting on a boulder far away from the road. My first impression was that it was some large gargoyle or something. I remember thinking how weird it was because I was like, who in their right mind would place a gargoyle out here? I thought they belonged on Gothic-style buildings and things of that nature in downtown government buildings and cities. It was pretty large too. Even from far away, I could tell the boulder in itself was larger than the car, but I just assumed it was a statue of some sort. It wasn't moving at all and appeared to be perfectly still. I even nudged my brother to the right of me and said, "Look, I didn't know they had a gargoyle out here." His reaction was just kind of like, "Huh, maybe the natives out here built it for protection." Our conversation probably lasted a whole 2 minutes, and then we continued on with life and the drive to Vegas. The same area that we were driving by had a section of specific houses in a tiny row, maybe like 3 or 4, and a notable, broken down old blue Ford pickup in front. Not far away was the boulder in question, with the gargoyle statue on top of it, or what I believed to be. We continued our trip to Vegas and did our week-long vacation. We drove back from Vegas on that exact same road, and I just also happened to be on the passenger seat, back seat this time. Looking at the same direction on the way home, we came across this exact stretch of road, and without me even thinking, I just happened to be looking out in the same area. I knew it was it because my mind immediately recognized that old beat-up Ford pickup truck, the blue one that I had just mentioned, that I saw a week prior. Then, I saw the few houses that were in the same line and row, and realized this is the exact spot we passed. However, when I glanced over at the large boulder, the gargoyle-looking statue was gone. My stomach immediately knotted up. It was just too strange for me. I want to clarify with you that at the distance we were at, this statue, assuming that's what it was, would be far too large for it to be just randomly taken down and away. I mean, it is possible, but why would there be a large gargoyle statue sitting on top of a boulder in the middle of the desert by a few old houses? It is very possible that this is exactly what it was, but if my memory serves me correct, gargoyle statues are much more gray, since they are made of stone. This was shaped like a gargoyle statue, or what my mind would depict as one, based on statues on Gothic buildings, but it was very dark in color, and not like gray, like stone. Its color was vastly different from the brown and tan rock it was perched on top of. Even though it was perfectly still, looking out in our direction, I never once would have thought it to be real or even move. And no, I never once saw eye shine or eye glow or anything weird like that. Just a big dark shape. Its wings were even folded up, just like in traditional gargoyle fashion, I did not say anything to anybody in the car when I saw that it wasn't there, but I will give you more of a size comparison. Even though we were a distance away, the boulder was clearly larger than the Ford pickup truck that I could see. And when we drove by the first time, this statue, or whatever it was that it was perched on top of that boulder, was also larger than the boulder, meaning that the statue was huge, maybe 20 to 30 feet in height. Listen, I'm not trying to exaggerate details here. I'm trying to give you as accurate information as I can recall. I don't really think much of it because even though it was weird and it did creep me out, life just went on and I never thought to tell anybody about it. After listening to your channel, I thought maybe I should chime in with my own weird experiences. After all, I've heard many instances of things going bump in the desert, whether it be creatures or things that fly. My father just recently shared some very interesting information with me when we were sitting down watching a movie. The movie in question is Army of Darkness. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie or not, but it's great. But that's not why I'm writing to you. My father and I were sitting down watching this movie, and there's a scene that's in the latter part of the movie where this flying demon grabs the girl and flies off with her to take her to be transformed into this evil being. As we're watching this movie, my dad starts acting funny during the scene, and I look over at my dad and ask him what's up. He literally had to get up and leave the room. I could tell he was visibly shaken and pale and didn't look good. I followed him and asked him what was wrong, and he told me he would tell me later. Anyway, the night ended and we finished the movie, and he was outside on the deck smoking a cigarette. That's when I decided to pursue and ask what was that all about earlier. He told me, "Son, you probably won't believe me if I told you this." But I assured my father. I told him I loved him and that I would believe him if he told me, whatever it was. Obviously something about the movie was really bothering him, and I wanted to know. My father spent a lot of time in Australia 20 years ago when he was married to his first wife of 9 years. She, unfortunately, passed away from breast cancer well over 10 years ago, and my father would later on move to the East Coast of the United States, where we still are. I don't know if he was a legal citizen over there, but he spent years doing all sorts of stuff. I don't know what his line of work was, and I don't exactly know what it is that he did, but he has told me some of the other adventures of him exploring the Australian outback, and the other times he's almost been killed by some of the crazy wildlife that's out there. Crocodiles, jellyfish, all sorts of stuff. He even has a story about meeting some indigenous people after a 5-day-long rendezvous in the outback and getting lost. I know, the man has seen some things, but I wasn't really expecting him to tell me what he did. I almost didn't believe him at first, if it wasn't for him being so shaken. I bring up the outback because this is what he brought up. He told me during his time of exploring out there and driving around, he came across a large pit in the earth, is how he described it. He said it looked to be man-made, but was easily about 50 feet in diameter. Quite literally, a large hole that you could not see the bottom of, aka a bottomless pit. He said as he approached it, this flying demon flew out and nearly grabbed onto him and almost pulled him in, nearly dragging him down into the pit. He managed to push away somehow in the nick of time and avoid falling into this hole. The flying demon flew off in the sky past the mountains that were around him. When we were watching the movie and that scene came on, he said the creature that appeared on the screen looked nearly identical to what he saw come out of that pit, in size, stature, color, look, everything. That scene immediately brought him back to the exact moment and forced him to leave the room. My dad's not usually like that, and he's not really bothered by much. He's a firm and staunch believer in science and things that can be proven physically. So for him to tell me a tale like this was a little unnerving. I remember him shaking with his cigarette in his hand as he's explaining this to me, that will always have a lasting effect in my memory. The area that he found this pit in was probably a good 50 plus miles away from any civilization. He was out there, and when I say out there, I mean it. You have to understand that he would spend days, if not weeks at a time, just going back there exploring, getting himself lost on several occasions. He's come into contact with all sorts of dangerous and poisonous venomous animals. But this recollection of events really shook him more than anything else. I asked him if he thinks hell really exists, and that if this thing came from hell. He told me he never believed in hell, and was a firm atheist, but now he's more open-minded and says he doesn't know. I almost wonder if that pit was an entrance to hell, or some sort of cavern system in which this thing lived in, but even he didn't know. Anyway, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, but to give you a point of reference, especially if you're going to read this to your audience, would be to Google Army of Darkness Flying Demon. And that should show you exactly what we saw in the movie, and what my dad claims to have come out of the pit. The surrounding was pretty much just bush and openness, with some mountains in the background. This pit was literally found in the middle of nowhere. My father never unveiled to me the province of Australia that he was in, because I personally am not too familiar with the geography of that country. But I know that Australia is humongous, and the outback stretches for so much mileage and area. I know there's other talk about things living in the outback, such as indigenous tribes and all sorts of stuff, and there's so much range for survivability, even amongst the harsh climates and dangerous venomous animals that live there. Certain people thrive in that environment. My father certainly did in his younger days, even though he had this hair-raising story like this one. My story takes place in early October 2004. Listen, this is a little bit emotionally taxing for me to share, so I hope you can bear with me in case I get lost. I did lose a close friend during this incident, and I don't take it very lightly. He was murdered by whatever animal we happened to encounter that day. What it was, I'm not sure. Even the police report listed that he had fallen to his death, but weren't sure how. During this time, I was spending a lot of my free time hiking with some other close friends of mine, namely one of my best friends, Richard. He was only 2 years older than I, and we spent weekends trekking into the wilderness, building up our endurance and stamina for more intensive hikes. This particular incident, we were hiking on Mount St. Helens, which is in Washington State, for those that are uneducated. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound that snarky in a condescending way. I just don't expect you or anybody you might share this with to automatically know the United States. We had planned a weekend where him and I were going to climb this mountain and reach the summit. I'm not exactly sure what happened along the way. We got to a section on the trail where we began hearing rustling and loud noises from the timber near us, like something big was moving. We stopped to see, and out up in the trees came this large, giant bat, or so it looked like at first, but was covered in thick, matted hair. It was humongous, much larger than a bat, and the longer Richard and I spent looking at it, we could make out more details, that it looked to be more like a giant gorilla with wings that flew right at us. Richard and I took off fleeing for our lives as this massive bat gorilla thing, human, took aim at us. It propelled itself right at Richard and grabbed him up underneath his arms, picked him up, and started flying up in the air with him. I'm screaming bloody murder and the sheer disbelief of what is actually happening before me. This thing flies a little ways over a steep, rocky embankment and drops him about 80 feet, and he falls to his death, landing broken on the rocks beneath. I really don't like to get into detail beyond this because it's too traumatic for me to recall. I'm going to leave it at that. I saw everything, blood and all. I wish this encounter could be longer, but it was so traumatic for me that I feel like my brain blocked out a lot of the vital and visual details. Even writing you as much as I have about this encounter, I feel like has been enough. My understanding from what police told me is that he died on impact, which was evident with the way he landed and what I saw. Maybe I'll contact you at a different time when I feel more comfortable explaining things out in more detail. I'm sorry. I've seen my fair share of weird things in my life, but what my wife and I saw this day makes me question the reality that we live in. We were in Northern California at the time, on our way to go see the redwoods. We vacation around the U.S. often, and so this was our first time driving through California. We were driving northbound along Highway 101, which runs along the coastline. If you're driving north on your left-hand side, aka west, you could look out and see the beach and the ocean. I would frequently keep looking over to my left, watching the spectacle of the waves crashing in. It's really a sight to behold, and if you ever find yourself on the beach of the West Coast, it's truly worth a drive. Remember that, Highway 101. I can remember it like it was yesterday. Sunny clear skies and a beautiful afternoon. Then I noticed something that didn't quite fit the scenery that I was looking at. I saw this black shape up here over the water. At first, I thought it was the shape of a seagull, since there are tons of coastal aquatic birds around the area. But I noticed this shape didn't quite fit that of a typical bird, and it was beyond much larger than what I would expect. Whatever it was that was flying in the air, I have zero perception of how high it was above the water. It was flying at an angle though, heading north, but northeast, so it was slowly coming in our direction while still aiming north, meaning that eventually this thing would fly directly overhead if it kept on its path, and we would intersect. If it continued to fly and slowly got closer and closer when I pointed to my wife and said, "What kind of bird is that?" She looked over and was just as clueless as I. I feel terrible for admitting that I should have spent more of my time looking at the road than I did this thing, but it was such an anomaly to me that I couldn't quite help it. A couple of minutes of watching this thing, it got closer and closer to where we could make out more distinctive features, like that it had large wings that was shaped like a person. There was no coloring or any sort of light emanating from this animal, or what I would assume to be an animal. It was just pitch black. The closer it got, the larger it became, and we soon realized that it was much larger than any bird we know of. Of course, there was other traffic on the road, so I'm sure we were not the only ones to witness this that same day. It was in plain view for anybody and everybody to see. Nothing was obstructing our view. At one point or another, it just vanished, and we never saw it again. We're not sure where it went, or if it descended, or if it shot off in a different direction without us noticing. With me driving, I couldn't keep my eyes on it 100% of the time, so I would just keep quickly glancing over at it. And between the last glance, it was gone. It sparked hours worth of conversation between my wife and I on what it could have been. Later on, pulling on our laptop, we tried to look at anything that would remotely resemble what we saw, and that's for the first time when we saw a picture, or should I say silhouette, of the Mothman. I don't know anything about this supposed Mothman, but I do know that the silhouette of this thing, a big husky-looking black shape with large wings, is almost identical to what we saw. Even with the sun shining and the broad daylight, there were still no features, only discernible darkness. But the shape is exactly what I saw and remember it being. I don't know if there's any correlation, but my wife stumbled upon it and showed me and said that it is an interesting match. My wife and I have pretty firm beliefs and roots in science, being agnostics and all, but I feel it's important for everybody to always try and keep an open mind if presented with new information that will change my beliefs. This has been one of those events in my life that makes me question what I know, because there is certainly no explanation for what we saw. We have not talked to anybody else about our experience. My best friend and I were chased by something. What? I'm not sure. I can tell you it looks like a giant hideous bat from hell that latched itself onto the top of my car and held on for some time before finally flying off into the night. It even tried to shove its clawed hand in my window and grab at me. It still stands as one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever endured in my life, and I'm a person who has survived ample emotional and physical abuse as a child. The fear that I experienced from this doesn't even come close to my childhood recollections. Years back, my friend and I were doing a little bit of road tripping since I'd saved some money and we were wanting to see some parts of the East Coast and around that area. Originally, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I've made a lot of friends via online gaming, so we thought it would be fun to visit up with them and just crash at their house instead of hoteling and spending a lot of time sleeping in our car when we could. At this point in our trip, we were going through Missouri, and I want to say we were in the Mark Twain National Forest, if I remember correctly. After a while, all the woods in the country starts to look the same. I'm not exactly sure what happened, because my friend and I put our GPS to one of my friend's coordinates, and somehow the GPS must have rerouted us because we went in the total opposite direction, and were wandering around in the forest around 1 in the morning, trying to find out where we were and where were we supposed to go. Yes, the National Forest is a beautiful place to be, but when you're by yourself, tired and stressed, and you're the only person around for miles, well, besides my friend, it's not exactly the funnest. The GPS told us we were supposed to take this one lone road, but we did, and it seemed like it kept rerouting us. I was getting flustered, and so was my friend, so we were going to try and loop around to see if we can get back to the same way we came. Let me explain to you that we were the only people out on the road at this time, as we did not see another pair of headlights for well over an hour. We were driving, and he was fiddling with the GPS, trying to get it working properly. My brights are on, and so I can see pretty much everything in front of me. And that's when I see these two glowing dots getting closer to us. I realize these dots are a pair of eyes, and then I start to see the shape that they are attached to, and I begin screaming dramatically. For a split second, I thought it was a bat, but then I realized it was easily 5 to 6 times larger than your typical bat, and its face was much more hideous. It looked like a demon bat, if I had to tell you what I thought, and it was much bigger than I. It flew right at our car and landed on top of the vehicle. I could feel it, the weight pressing down on the car and holding onto the roof while we're going about 50 miles an hour, trying to swerve across the road and knock it off the car. My friend and I are screaming, oh God," at this thing, and it sticks its nasty arm in the driver's side window, nearly grabbing for my face. As I take a sharp swerve to the left into the oncoming lane, it pulled its arm out quickly to try and rebalance itself. Thank goodness there was no other oncoming traffic during this. I sped up to around 80 miles an hour and slammed on my brakes as hard as I could. I was driving so erratically, trying to get this thing off of our roof, that I'm surprised I did not flip the car once. I could feel the weight come off the vehicle as soon as it left and flew off. My friend and I just kept driving for hours, amped up on adrenaline and fear, not knowing what just happened to us and trying to process what that was. We ended up driving for a few more hours, stopping at a gas station to get a couple of Monster energy drinks and pushing through until morning, until we could find somewhere to crash. I certainly was not going anywhere near the forest we just came through with whatever the hell that thing was. This was just a couple of months ago. I was driving along Interstate 80, probably about 100 plus miles outside of Chicago, heading west. It was evening time, fairly dusky, and since I was facing away from the sunset, the night looked rather darker than usual. Out on my passenger's side, I make out what I can see as 2 yellow eyes flying directly towards my vehicle. Whatever this was swooped down so quickly towards my windshield that I almost swerved into the other lane, but it shot up within inches, it felt like, of my car. I yelled loudly, "What was that?" Obviously, I said a lot more colorful words than that when I just told you, but for the sake of the story, I'll censor it, because it was quite vulgar. Then I see the same large shape fly off in the same direction it came. I have no idea what it is that I saw, but nothing can mistake those two large eyes that I saw, or what I believe to be eyes. They were almost a piercing artificial yellow. I wish I can give you a more accurate shape other than the body and two large wings. I have no business with these kinds of things, since I work for a private insurance firm. I'd really prefer if you kept my credentials private and didn't mention my name or where I was from. Whatever it was scared the living daylights out of me, and I had to pull over and take 5 outside my car with my cigarette. While I was out smoking, I checked my car for damage, and luckily there was none. I don't think whatever kind of bird it was hit my car. Then again, I don't know if it was a bird or not. Do birds have big glowing yellow eyes like that are larger than me? It freaked me out, and I don't know if this fits in any category that you know of. I kept it to myself because I thought I was losing it, and I didn't want anybody else to think I was crazy or having some bizarre hallucinations. That is until around mid-May, when one of my childhood friends, Sam, has dinner with me and shared her experience with what I believe to be the same thing I saw. Her sighting occurred near her home, where it landed on her roof and tried to break into her house from what she described. She even called the police, and by the time they arrived, this thing was long gone. She has a portion on her house where she has a large sunroof or window on her roof, and this thing was peeking in, trying to break through the glass. She told me it was the most terrifying and horrifying thing that she's ever had happen to her. I was so shaken by her testimony myself and can feel her fear that I decided to open up about what I saw only a few weeks prior to this dinner. She lives just outside of Chicago to the north in a larger, more sparser neighborhood. There's not as many houses packed together, so it's not a tight little suburb like you'd expect. After exchanging testimonies, we believe that we saw the same thing. The only thing she brought up with that she believes it could be was the Mothman, which fits the description of what she and I explained. I don't know anything about that stuff, as I said already, so this was news to me, but I thought you might find this interesting. Look, I'm just trying to live my life as normal as possible, and if I don't think about these things, then maybe I won't have to worry about them happening again, and I can just leave this all in the past where I want it to stay, for good.